When it comes to May December, while Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman facing off reminds you of some of the best adversaries in film, Charles Melton, who's trapped in the middle of these two, finds room to give a remarkable performance that likely is going to lead to a major shift in his career. So to summarize the film, honestly, the quick summary I can give is if you're familiar with the Mary Kay Letourneau story, this is pretty much an inspired, dramatized version of that. Around 24 years ago, a woman named Gracie met this young man named Joe who was in the 7th grade while she was 36. They had an affair. She got pregnant, went to jail, and now they're out. I mean, she's out. They're married, have kids beyond the first one. And the addition when it comes to May December is that Elizabeth, this TV star, she's working on an indie movie focused on the relationship between Gracie and Joe. And so she comes to Savannah, Georgia to observe them and ask questions of the community. Now, as you can imagine, any community that had such a scandal is somewhat iffy about it being revived. Yet at the same time, it is the talk of a town that this big time TV actress is in there, is in town. So people open up about what happened at the pet shop in the back storeroom. We meet Gracie's ex-husband who talks about his feelings. We meet Gracie's son who brings up a son type of things. And of course, we also meet Gracie and Joe's kids who, when it comes to the oldest, is vehemently against this movie. And the younger ones, they're not for the idea of their mom being shown in a negative light. Yet at the same time, because of how much Elizabeth is digging up, we start to see the real Gracie beyond this naive, delicate person and begin to see the woman who somehow is able to not only gain a place in her society where she gets to be social and out there without feeling shunned, but perhaps make the kind of bubble where she even has some kind of power. So, notable top level highlight when it comes to May December is just watching Portman and Moore face off. And it's because you can tell that Gracie, she's curious about what Elizabeth wants. And after a certain point, as she starts to pick up that Elizabeth is a threat, so comes a lot of southern shade or subtleties that make it so that you can feel the tension, and you know that Gracie ain't gonna slap Elizabeth or nothing like that, but there's a certain desire, there's certain hatred, there's certain threat of what Elizabeth can do that is just boiling. And then when you add the fact that when it comes to Elizabeth and Gracie, Joe is kind of put in the middle as Elizabeth kind of... One of the things that Elizabeth does that really pushes Portman to the forefront is that Elizabeth is Juilliard trained, so there's a good chance she knows how to do method acting. So when it comes to her learning about the places that Joe and Gracie hooked up when Joe was in 7th grade and she was 36, when it comes to her actually going to the location where they may have had sex for the first time or things like that, or even a casting where she's trying to judge the attractiveness of the young boys who may play a young Joe, there's something twisted there. There's her seemingly trying to get into Gracie's head, and being that Gracie is somebody who has this duality to her where she wants to seem innocent, vulnerable, I need protection, yet at the same time, it's very clear in her household that she can manipulate Joe anytime he tries to bring up anything dark or else he tries to question things. There's this delicate balance mixed in with this woman who wants to understand Gracie yet at the same time questions her that leads to them having a very dynamic performance that is volatile at times. And as noted in the overview, opening, whatever you want to call it, Charles Melton as Joe is just stuck in the middle of this. And in many ways, you can see he gets eaten up by both Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, but it's in a way where he doesn't get eclipsed as an actor, but more so it allows you to see Joe's vulnerability. Joe is somebody who, at a young age, fell for a woman who was perhaps one of his first. And in her mind, she tries to justify her position with Joe because Joe had to take care of his younger siblings. He was so mature, yada, yada, yada. And so likely she put this in Joe's mind so that he has given Gracie the kind of grace and other means to allow her to be somebody that isn't the villain of his story, who isn't his molester but is his wife. Yet, as Elizabeth keeps pushing him to question things, and he starts to take note that he's now going to have 3 children that have graduated high school, and meanwhile, he's like 36 years old and he's never smoked marijuana, yet he gets his first chance to do so with his son. That's when Charles Melton really starts to shine, because you see him really tap into this. I forgot who the name of Mary Kay Letourneau's lover was. I think it's Billy or something like that. But you see him get to tap into that perspective that's perhaps not really seen, in terms of this man's youth was stolen from him by this older woman who, because that was his first, because of the controversy and likely the stigma that he had to deal with, the ability and option to potentially talk to other girls or women, never mind then there's this kid that he has to take care of. He was forced to grow up far beyond what he wanted to or else was capable of, maybe. And yet, here he is, sitting with his son, having his first taste of weed, and as much as he wants to celebrate and be happy for his son, he also has to mourn his youth. And then comes Elizabeth, who starts to push and question why you're still with this woman, considering what happened. And being that Joe's family doesn't want to talk about what happened, being that Gracie sure as hell doesn't want to talk about what happened, and we will flip things on him so that, you know, she can't be the bad guy, he's the bad guy because he took a part in this and yada, yada, yada. It makes you, like right now, a part of me doesn't know if I'm slightly stuttering and slowing down because, you know, I'm talking a mile a minute, or because it makes you kind of emotional for Joe's in Charles's performance, since he has no one, there's no outlet for him. And yes, you can definitely tell that his son Charles understands the situation, and probably his sisters do as well, but what can they say? They're stuck between a rock and a hard place almost as much as him. They know, or at least are aware of what happened between their mother and father, yet at the same time, if it didn't happen, they wouldn't have been here. So there's this push and pull with them as well, where this situation is hard to talk about. So unfortunately, just as Joe suffers by not getting to communicate about it, perhaps in some ways they do too, but unfortunately for Joe, he can't escape it while they can. With that said, one of the things that may be something that could be an issue for some is that in no ways is this about either Joe's kids with Gracie or Gracie's kid from her previous marriage, yet at the same time, it's hard to not want to know more of their perspective. Gracie has one son who speaks. It kind of gives you insight, but at the same time, he's a bit of a bastard in a way, so even when he reveals certain things about Gracie, you don't know if it's true or not, or whether or not it's part of his manipulation tactic because he wants to use Elizabeth in order to get to the next level in his career. And then when it comes to Joe's children with Gracie, as noted, his relationship with his son, a lot of it goes unspoken in him understanding his dad, but he doesn't necessarily ask about anything, or even confront anything. And the same goes for his 2 daughters. His eldest doesn't want the situation talked about because, you know, she was born from the controversy. And then when it comes to the second daughter, she isn't comfortable with the idea of her mom being portrayed as a villain because then maybe she has to reckon with what happened to her parents. And as much as you can get it as an audience member, there are some points where you're like, especially as Elizabeth starts asking questions and really starting to mess with this bubble that Gracie has built for herself, it makes you wish that Elizabeth would have pushed harder with certain people in certain areas so that we could have got that take, since more than likely we're never going to get that actual take from any of the kids who are involved in a real life situation. And I know this is a dramatized version of their lives, and we should always respect the privacy, especially considering what they went through, but it's hard to not be curious. And through this dramatization, that's the only way that curiosity for many could ever be satiated, I think is the word. I'm probably saying it wrong, but you get what I'm saying. But overall, from the twisted games of Elizabeth and Gracie to Joe starting to deal with the reckoning of losing his youth to a woman who has potentially manipulated him for 2 decades, May December is an emotional roller coaster that is exciting, draining in some ways, and truly pushes those involved in a way that makes it clear that more important are veterans. And when it comes to Melton, he's definitely a notable up-and-coming talent.